Good morning. Welcome to the Roadmap MBA. My name is Ash. I am Ashleigh King, and I'm so excited to see you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I'm going to be talking about today. So this morning I'm going to be talking about a book I'm reading called Profit First, which I love, and it's really changed my perspective on some things. I also want to share my musings on why profit matters, but also the challenge I have around the word profit, because I usually like to favor people over money. So how you can be impactful but still worry about your money and actually look after your money. I'm going to talk about the importance of market research and why that matters, but also how you can do market research and where and why. And then also share some stories about why I wish I'd done more market research in 2019 when I set up my business, why I wish I'd done less in 2020, and what market research I am doing today. So that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about. I also wanted to just say hi and tell you a bit about me as well, because I know that some people watching won't have seen this before, won't know me as a person or the work I do, or might not even know the Roadmap MBA. So for anyone listening, I'll start with the Roadmap MBA. So the Roadmap MBA is a brilliant product, which I love. It is a real world accessible education. So what that means is you can learn really valuable business knowledge and tips that goes out to many countries all over the world. I believe Roadmap MBA is in 28 countries now. But the idea of it is to make business education more accessible, so that it's not only those who are privileged who can attend and learn MBA level quality knowledge and training. So I have recently been invited to guest present on the Roadmap MBA, which I'm really excited about. I studied my Master's in Business Administration at Newcastle University Business School, which was wonderful, and it was a different experience as a classroom MBA. It is something I'm going to be discussing at some point, my thoughts and musings on Challenger MBAs and why they are so important in really changing education, but that's a topic not for today. So about me, my name, as I said, is Ashleigh King. I am what I call a creative entrepreneur, and I'm also a podcaster. So those are the two key things that I would use to describe myself. As a creative, I love to paint, draw, arrange flowers. I love to make spaces look beautiful. I love interior design, fashion, colors. It's a huge part of my personality, and it's probably my greatest strength is my creativity. As an entrepreneur, some people really struggle with that word, and I guess I did too, because entrepreneur can mean that you are someone who takes lots of risks, and sometimes we have to in our business. But I also am a business owner, is overcoming adversity a lot. So you'll see a lot of cactus in my motifs and logos, and that's because we all go through prickly situations in life, and I believe that through courage, curiosity and creativity, we can find inspiration, and this can help you to nurture your zest. So I chat to really interesting people from all over the world, mainly in the UK in a recorded studio, so it's a professionally recorded podcast, but I also do a live stream where I've chatted to people from around the world. I'm shocked every day by the analytics when I look back. So some of the listeners are in Finland, Uganda, they're in Tunisia, all over the world. I find myself wondering how people in Alaska have found me. So I truly believe that podcasting can really help people. And that's one of the reasons why I do a lot of training in teaching people to podcast and one-to-one coaching. So that's a little bit about me. I've also ran a business since 2019 where I would say I've really almost ran my business into the ground, and I've had some real learnings that I'm going to be sharing today relating to market research and profit and why those kind of concepts matter. So I think that's probably all I want to share about me for now, but I'd love to meet you. So if you're listening for the first time, it's the first time getting to know me, please drop me a note in the comments and say hi. It's really good to meet you and learn more about you. And you can also catch me over at my pages and website Nurture Your Zest, but also I have a podcast studio called Flamingo Heights, which is in a very creative part of the Oosburn in Newcastle, which I love. So yeah, that's enough on that. So I want to tell you about a book I'm reading. I think when I present and when I share stuff on this channel, which I'll be doing every 2 weeks, I'm going to be talking at least probably every fortnight or at least each session about books on my table, because I love to read and I love to learn. So what I'm reading at the moment is a book called Profit First by, I might say this wrong, Mike Michalowicz. I can't pronounce that right, so apologies, Mike, if you ever hear this, but it's a brilliant book. And the reason I love that book is because it's taught me so much. There's been so many moments where I've thought, whoa, that's crazy. Why didn't I think of that? So I did want to point out the title at first, Profit First, that actually really triggered me. I think everyone has little things that make them think a certain way, or they feel a feeling. So for those who aren't familiar with the word trigger, you know, it's like you might see something on TV, or you might meet someone at a networking event, and for some reason something in you just goes no, or there's some sort of sensation you feel. So I had that when I heard that title, Profit First. And actually it sat on the shelf for ages and I just didn't want to read it because I was thinking, what is this book? But when I was studying my own MBA, I decided to read it because I was looking at different books around entrepreneurship. And I loved that book because it gave me a totally different perspective to anything else I'd ever read. Now, I've read lots of brilliant books that I will talk about in future sessions, like Building Tribes with Seth Godin. You know, there's ones, I can't even think about them all. There's so many entrepreneurial papers and research that I'd love to talk about. I think it's When a Thousand Flowers Bloom, but I can't remember the exact one. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But this book, what I really liked was it talked about money and it talked about finance in a way that I could access. So if you've watched any of my previous stuff on the Roadmap Mba, I've talked a lot about women in entrepreneurship, or just entrepreneurship generally, how lonely it can feel and how difficult it can be to get funding. And one of the things that I think is really important is actually to think about what we do with our money, how we are funding ourselves to give us the oxygen in our business. And I'm accrediting that oxygen word to Steve Pugh, who's here with me in the studio, but because he taught me that really valuable lesson that I didn't have any oxygen in my business. So let's dive in a little bit. So what does Profit First mean? So I wonder what you might think, and you please write in the comments if you have any initial thoughts. But for me, it was that you only care about profit, you only care about the bottom line, what you make, all this kind of thing. One of the things that Mike goes through first in his book is he talks about your business being like a little monster. Now, you might be thinking and watching this, I don't have a business, so I don't care, I don't resonate with that. That might be true, but if you're working for a small enterprise, small medium enterprise, maybe where they have 20 people or 250 people, those directors are still probably having those challenges where they are not really thinking about their cash flow. So one of the things that really shocked me was to hear so many stories in his book. And also, this is something I hear all the time if I go to a networking event, is the people that I become close to, they share with me, actually, you know, I'll say like, hey, how is things going? You know, you look like everything is just wonderful online. And they're like, yeah, but I can't sleep at night because I don't know how I'm going to make payroll. In fact, Stephen Bartlett, who I admire in lots of ways, and I'm curious about as someone to watch, and you know, how he does his marketing and his whole way of doing business. But Stephen Bartlett shared something, and I think it was very courageous actually and vulnerable. I don't know that I could have shared this, but he talked about a time where he was actually trying to get funding at the last minute, trying to persuade his clients over networking to, you know, invest in big projects so that he could make his payroll. He had NatWest on the line who was saying, if you don't make 4 million, if you don't pay that into your account today, or if you don't have that in writing that that's coming, we can't help you. We can't help release your payroll. And he had his payroll, you know, coming up. He wasn't going to be able to pay his staff. And what he shared was that that wasn't just one time. That happened 15 times at least, or it happened on multiple occasions. And I'm wondering how many people we go to who we see at networking events or who we see online who look like they're absolutely smashing it are actually doing that. So in this book, Mike talks a lot about his experience, and he also talks about how he let his ego get the better of him. So at one point he'd sold 2 businesses. He thought he was, you know, really hot at what he did. His family and friends told him he had the Midas touch at running a business. And what he started to do was he got a bit of an ego. He made an investment in 10 companies thinking that he was the ticket that was going to help them succeed. But the problem was that because he'd bootstrapped everything, so he had saved everything from, you know, and put everything into his business and really invested in himself. What he had done then is when he helped those entrepreneurs as an angel investor, he actually gave them everything. He gave them free marketing. He gave them free legal services. So it's not that our angel investors shouldn't do that. I think that's wonderful that we've got people who want to get behind businesses. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying we should have people who coach us and mentor us and help us to grow and teach us skills like in the MBA roadmap, or if you're working with a coach one-to-one, you know, that you can actually learn those skills, but you go on a journey and you take ownership and you take responsibility. And what I found really interesting is he had just given all these resources. So he was shocked when he bought, you know, all these fancy cars and things, and he had to send them all back. You know, within a year, he had to sack people, and he had invested in 10 companies, and he was left with only one that succeeded, and that wasn't to do with him. And he says, I really hold my hands up, it was to do with the leadership team in that startup who actually had the gusto and the grit to actually move on. So I just found all of these stories so fascinating, because I often meet people who they look like they are absolutely killing it, as we might say. They are doing so well. But I also meet so many people who are exhausted, and they tell me that they are working every hour of the day. And I've started to find this in my business. I don't mind being frank and honest, you know, on this channel, and really sharing where I'm at with things. You know, at the moment, for the first time, I've invested in a studio. I have a space that I'm responsible for, and I need to pay my rent, and I need to make sure that I do that so that I can look after my clients so they've got somewhere to come and record or train. I've got a team, you know, I want them to have a space that they feel happy in. So I think it's something I'm learning at the moment is about, what do you do with your money? How do you manage your money? How do you look after your money? Why does it matter in business? And also, you know, there's little things that I've been learning about, simple things like I used to hide away from money in my business. I just used to be like, oh, money doesn't matter. It'll work out as long as I keep working harder, as long as I keep trying harder, as long as, you know, I just put the effort in. The world's nice. It's going to come to me. It's all going to work out. And what Mike says in his book is that's what happens in the movies, you know. So he actually shares a story of a woman, Debbie, that he meets at a conference, she just burst into tears because he has this assessment tool. So you can go through, and I would really encourage you to use it on his website, but you can actually go through and see where your business is now and where it should be projected and what the gap is. And honestly, it's quite scary. I did it myself, and I got a bit of a shock. And so I would say, this woman had been running her business for 9-10 years. She did this tool with him, and she burst into tears because she was putting every penny she had into her business. She'd been working on it hour after hour, day after day. And this is why, you know, we see so many entrepreneurs fail, because they're taking on clients that aren't respecting them, don't value their services, don't value the work they do. they're not a great fit, to be honest. They're not living their values as well. Because they stressed, their relationships are suffering, they're not sleeping. You know, there's so many things that go into this. And I think one of the things we can do as entrepreneurs is make sure that we support each other. I know as a female entrepreneur, that's really important to me, is to be able to create spaces that women I work with can share, you know, their real challenges, and do that in a safe space where they feel supported. So I think it's important to check in, but it's also important to pay people on time and look after them. And so this book has just been so interesting to me because it talks about profit, but it talks about also paying yourself. Now, I found this really interesting. So I have been wanting to put all my money and resources into my business. And this book, Profit First, says that the first thing you should do is pay yourself. And when I read that, I was like, that is absolutely crazy. How do you even do that when you don't have the cash flow to support that? And so what he says is, even if it's £50, $50, whatever your currency is, £100, having something that you can see is, you know, you getting something from your business takes away that resentment that you might feel. And, you know, everyone is in a different position. And this is the thing, I just want to say as a disclaimer, don't judge how well people are doing by what you see on social media. Some people are excellent at PR, but it doesn't mean that they're making any money, and at any moment their business could end. So I just want to say that, because I hear this so much, and it's sad to hear about people who are really struggling. I also want to say that one of the things that you learn in Profit First is it's also about thinking about things outside the box. So it's actually a lot about frugality. Do you really need that thing? Now, I'm not here on the Steve praise show. I think Steve's pretty great, but I do want to say one of the things I really admire about Steve is he buys really quality products. So he buys once, in my opinion, from what I've seen as an outsider, but he also has brilliant processes, and that's another thing I'm going to cover at some point in a future session. But I've learned so much about saving money and time through actually looking at the ways we can save our processes. It could be something as simple as having your printer next to your computer so that you just click a button and your printer will print. For me, I have to first go and make sure, is the printer plugged in? Is it connected? Does it even work? Does it have ink? So he's got all the basic setup that he needs to just get going if he ever needs it. And I think that's a really important thing. How much profit are we losing by not being ready for opportunities when they come up? A similar thing that I've learned is, for instance, if I go to a conference or some kind of expo or something like that, I would tend to just look around my studio and grab some things, and then I would have them ready. But it takes me a lot of time to get there. I've got to hire a taxi. I've got to make sure that the taxi can fit all the equipment in. And actually, what might be better is to just have a smaller set that's just for those opportunities. So it's not that I'm wasting money, but I'm just planning to be more lean. And, you know, lean methodology is something you will learn in any MBA or in most businesses. It's actually, I believe, from a manufacturing and engineering background, but it helps you to evaluate your processes and where things are superfluous, which is a way to say extra, you know, where there are things that you just don't need. And I do want to point out here that if you are a neurodivergent entrepreneur like me, often we create processes that aren't necessary because we don't know the steps. We don't know what done looks like. So actually having lean methodology is great because you can get your business running faster and better, and you can save money and time, which is so valuable. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about profit first versus people over profit. So I've got certain hashtags I use that people associate with me, and one is people over profit. And I've always been someone who's been so into people and charity work, and, you know, really supporting businesses and supporting community groups, particularly that are underrepresented. So it might be for faith reasons, or for gender, or for race, or whatever reason. They're not represented, they don't have the same opportunities. And so in the past, that's meant that I've represented artists or tried to find funding for them, or, you know, really worked to do fundraisers and all kinds of different things. Now, what I didn't realize, and I'm going to go through this when I talk about market research in a moment, I didn't realize how much I was putting those people before me. So not even just before my business, but before my personal life, my family, my relationships, my friendships. So it's that old adage of, put your own oxygen mask on first, because what I was doing is I was giving from an empty cup. Now, I also want to say that it's important to reflect on where you've come from as a person. So for me, my background is I grew up at the end of apartheid in South Africa. So at that time, nobody, I felt so much guilt just being 5 or 6 years old, seeing people use a different staircase to me, seeing different rules in place for different nationalities and not understanding why. We had help at home when I was younger. There were just so many structural things around me in my society growing up in early apartheid as it was ending and the early independence in South Africa. It just was very difficult watching all of this go on. So I have this really strong passion for working with African artists and wanting to support them and wanting to make sure that I do everything I can to open doors and, be an ally and this kind of thing. But actually what I realized is sometimes I can actually put myself in positions where I'm trying to force myself to have a seat at a table that isn't mine to be at. And what I mean by that is I can sometimes want to prove my worth, and that's not the right thing for me to do. What I should be doing is going, how can I help you? How can I support you? But also, why am I wanting to support so much? And I realized for me, a lot of it was about guilt. It was about shame that my ancestors or people in my community had behaved in a certain way. I'm sure that I'm not the only one who's experienced this or who has behaved in this way. I think anyone who has lived in a country where there has been war, where you are on the side of the antagonist, I'm sure that many people feel shame for what their leaders have done. And so I've realized that I can help people and I love to help people, but I need to help people from a place of abundance and a place of having enough to help. I can't be struggling to pay my own rent, but be helping other people who are getting funding in other ways. So that's one point, but also around creating shared value and creating corporate social responsibility. So for those who are new to MBA concepts, you'll hear CSV and you'll hear CSR a lot. So creating shared value, which is shortened to CSV, is about what businesses can do right from the outset to create shared value for communities around them. And there is also corporate social responsibility, which is what we should do to be ethical and behaving in a responsible way. And there are so many links with things like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the UN SDGs. And there's so many ways that we can be ethical and mindful of what we're doing as businesses. But there is also some tension between CSV and CSR. And one of the things that I've noticed is talking to a lot of my international friends who've grown up in developing nations, or what we might consider developing nations. So if you look at Africa and if you look at India, there are some incredible innovative works coming up at the moment. There's, sometimes people have an idea in their head of small kids who aren't eating and, orphanages and things like this. And that may be true. But at the same time, there are a lot of really fantastic tech advancements, some engineering advancements that are happening that I've seen around wind and solar power and reforestation and just incredible stuff happening in lots of developing nations. But I'm particularly thinking at the moment of India and Africa, because I'm hearing my friends say to me, what we hear or what we think is we see these Western companies come over, they just do all this stuff, they create their shared value, they do their corporate social responsibility, but it's just PR, it's just money making. Nestle is often accused of this, although I think they've worked very hard over the years to try and improve that reputation. Similarly, Coca-Cola, if you look at many MBA case studies, one of the things you might have to do is look at Coca-Cola in some countries, how they've choked and strangled the water supply and rediverted that into their factories so they can make Coke that we can in the UK or the West drink, for quite an inexpensive drink. you know, and actually there are many communities who have dirty water, you know, so there are all these things. But in my head, as long as a company had a CSR policy and believed that they were doing the right thing, that was the right, you know, they were fine. So actually people over profit is not what I thought it was. I thought it was, you know, you filled in your policies and your procedures, and you don't want to hurt anyone, you want to do things well. But actually it's also about values. It's about values in your business and knowing what you're contributing to. So who is in your supply chain? Where do you get your things from? Who are you supporting? And that's why creating shared value is something I favor over corporate social responsibility. I think that it is important to consider many different things. A consideration I've had recently, because I used to work in the festival industry, and I've got a new client that I'm wanting to work with around raising awareness of the work they do in India and their supply chain. Now, when I first saw this shop and went into this shop, I wasn't sure what to think. So for example, every year they go to a festival, they go to Glastonbury, they'll go to all kinds of big festivals, and what they do is they sell items that were made in India, and they go and sell them there, and they also have their own store. And I know myself, coming from South Africa, how often people will come to Africa, buy goods that are made for next to nothing, sold on the street, sold in markets, take them to the UK and resell them. And this is a curio, I guess, you know, people are interested, they're different. And sometimes if you're into a particular, you know, religion or into a particular spirituality, you might really like to have these items that you wouldn't get if you didn't go to India or Africa or wherever they're from. Latin America is another one that we see this happening. However, what that can mean is you've got people who are really on the breadline or who are not making enough money, and they are their items are getting sold for 5, 6, you know, 15 times more, sometimes even 100% more. Sometimes it's crazy, the profit margins. And so I've always felt confused. Well, does that mean that we are creating shared value, or does that mean that it's corporate social? Should we be worried about these things where we have white people buying these things, bringing them over, and, you know, flogging them to their communities? And this is something I've really mused on. And actually, this is where it's a question as well of what can we do to improve our supply chains to help the people that we buy from. So a supplier that I've met recently sells coffee from Rwanda. It's really delicious coffee. I really love it, and it's made by 3 women. So they I think it's called Three Black Women or something like that. I can't remember the title, but the coffee is delicious. And I got annoyed when I find out that the guy who makes it and sells it in the UK is a white man. I just thought, well, I was buying this to support these women and independent business. And I wanted to know, well, what about your supply chain? How are you supporting these people in Rwanda? And you're bringing it over, but what are you doing to really help them? And I think this is something we need to think about. Where are we benefiting in our business from other people, whether it's in the UK or anywhere, wherever you are, whether it's in your local region, or if you're buying stuff, you know, from somewhere else? And what are you doing to like make sure that you've thought about where this is coming from and how you're supporting people? So those are some of my reflections on CSV and CSR, and I know that I'll go through that in a little bit more detail at some point. But I think people versus profit is something, and the profit first kind of contradiction is something I'm really musing on. And I know I've come to a conclusion, which I'll tell you in my summary, but I want to share some of my market research first. So real stories that have happened to me that have helped me come to my own understanding. I just want to take a sip of water as well and just take a breath. It gets very hot in the studio, so it's very nice to take a breather. I'd love to hear from anyone who's listening as well. You might not be watching live, but you might be watching on replay, because I will be also checking the comments. So if you want to share any thoughts or reflections, you don't need to agree with me. You can put your thoughts as well if they're different to mine. I'd love to hear them, because I think that actually When we have conflict or when we have difference in opinion, that's how we learn best. And actually, I believe that conflict is a key ingredient for innovation. So please do share your thoughts if you want to. So I wanted to talk about the importance of market research, and it's going to link back to all of this profit stuff I've been talking about. So market research, if you have a business and you're starting out, or even if you have a business and it's not working so well, I'd like to ask you, have you done any market research? I mean, market research is something you'll have to do in most jobs as a leader. You might hire someone to do that. You might work with someone, but it also might be something that you could do, asking yourself questions to reevaluate your knowledge and where you're at. So market research can be done in so many different ways, but it's really important to make sure you do meet people's needs. So I'm actually going to write some things on the board. So the first thing I'm going to do is share with market research. One of the things is demographics and audience. So I'll just write that down. Okay, so who are you actually wanting to reach? So you've got your, a lot of the time you'll hear about personas. That's a word we often use, but actually sitting and thinking, who do you want to reach? Who do you want to work with? One of the things that I do is I actually try to look back at myself 4 or 5 years ago. We call this the hero's journey, but this is often something where you've got some kind of knowledge or learning, and then you can actually reach those people because you know exactly how you felt 5 years ago when you really needed that. So an example of this is when I started Nurture Your Zest, I actually found that I wanted to reach people who were feeling stuck because more than 5 years ago, it was about 8 years ago, I found myself stuck in a job where I was doing repeated processes. I was doing a financial role. I was, reconciling accounts, and it was for a large, education institution. And I found it really difficult because I was bored out of my mind and I didn't know what was wrong with me. I thought there was something wrong with me. And I just thought I must be depressed, or I'm just boring, or I don't know. And what had happened is I just lost my passion because I was doing nothing that was in line with my values, and I wasn't feeling like I had an impact. So what I found myself doing is outside of work, I was actually going and doing the same finance stuff, but for charities or fundraising, so that I could still get that experience, but I was still giving. And so I felt so out of line with what I was doing in my values. Anyway, I started my podcast later, and I knew that I wanted to reach people who were stuck, who were sitting in that office, who were looking at Instagram, comparing themselves to other people and thinking, why is my life like this? I don't even want my life like this anymore. I'm so fed up. I just need to fix it. And so I decided that I was going to create 5 values, which were courage, creativity, curiosity, inspiration, and zest. And what I would want to do is talk about things like the tech sector, which links with the curiosity element, because I think there's so many amazing innovations that we can learn about. I would talk to people in the creative industries, arts and things like that, because that would really excite and intrigue them and get, stoke that interest. And I would also talk to people who've had really inspirational stories, so that their courage would help people to think about their life. What I found was a few years later, when I launched my podcast, there was one person, and I noticed they were in a particular country, and I kept saying, how did they find me? What? This is crazy. Like, this is such a small, tiny country. And they asked to have a Zoom call with me. And they said, hey, I've been listening to your podcast. I felt so inspired. I work in financial services. I earn a huge salary. I've quit my job and I'm going and selling coffee from a coffee cart at festivals. And I thought that was absolutely crazy, because you don't know the impact you could have on somebody else. But that couldn't have happened if I hadn't thought about who I wanted to reach. And so I would say the one thing that I've done really well, and I'll talk about some things I haven't done so well, but is actually think about who I wanted to reach, my personas. But honestly, it is so powerful when you hear that the people you wanted to reach actually connected with you. Also, a note on that, you won't make everyone happy. You can't. So I see this a lot with marketing. I used to call myself a digital marketer. That is my background. Do you know how big marketing is? You can do video content. You could do subtitling on videos. You can do small content for TikTok. You can specialize in Instagram. You can teach people how to get clients through Instagram direct selling, through Insta stories. You can be a PR and content person that helps work with press and represent people. There are so many ways you can do marketing, and a digital marketer nowadays has to know so many skills. So what I would say with that is know your strengths as well. So as well as your demographics, who you want to reach, this isn't just, by the way, this doesn't just need to be for single one person entrepreneurs. It's actually for small businesses as well. Even when I worked in big institutions where we looked at our marketing and how we wanted to reach potential prospective students, we would look at personas. What type of student do we want to attract? What kind of student is going to really love it here? But before you can do that, you also need to know what are your strengths. So I'm writing strengths, values, and something we see a lot, which is USP, which is your unique selling point. So this is something I hear a lot from people. What is so special about me? I'm just me. Like, no one would be interested in what I have to say. So I work with a lot of people who want to start a podcast, and they say, well, hang on, I'm boring. Like, I've got nothing interesting to me. A, they won't like my voice. B, I just don't have enough content. And I promise you, there is something interesting about you. Go through your life and look at all the different challenges you've experienced. You know, you may have amazing achievements. Some people are very achievement orientated, but what is the story behind those achievements? What did you have to overcome to get there? For some people, it might be, you know, something really difficult that you've had to overcome. For me, I've experienced trauma, but I've turned that into actually a passion for wanting to support people and overcome that. So what is it that is your story? What are your strengths? What are your values? How does that translate to business? Well, who do you want to work with and why do you want to help them? So I say to people that my mission and the reason I'm here on this earth is to help people share their stories with the world. And that's as simple as it is. Whether that's through copywriting, which I used to do, I don't write for people as much. Whether it's helping people share their stories through video, presenting, public speaking. So now I actually help people learn how to be confident on stage, how to practice their skills for being a guest on a podcast. Not everyone wants to start a podcast. Some people just want to grow their following by being a guest, but they don't know how to do that and they're afraid. So I would say that knowing your strengths and values is so important. But another thing with market research, which I think many people leave out, and I did, and I think this is one of the most important, is the market. So this is something I just didn't think about. So when I started my first business in 2019, I was acting like a charity without any funding. I was doing too much. I was trying to be everything to everyone. So I'll just pop these pens down. So for instance, I wanted to be a wedding planner. And so what I wanted to do was help people have really vintage weddings, upcycled items, eco-friendly weddings. I wanted to help support people to make decisions that were really ethical and just have a really beautiful day that they would remember for years. And what I found is that when I did my market research, which I didn't at the time, but when I did it during my MBA, I looked out of interest at the market segment and how big that market was. In the northeast of England, only 2% of people are looking for a wedding planner or are even getting married. Of the 2% who would actually want a wedding planner, most people would probably prioritize a luxury wedding because they would be in they would want to actually spend lots of money on their wedding. So for me to start an eco-friendly ethical weddings business where I was, you know, helping people use upcycled goods and actually teach them how to craft their own things and make their wedding beautiful, it wasn't the right fit. And so I did think of ways that I could meet different needs. But you know what happened is I started to do all of these events, baby showers, hen do's, things like this, where I would go and I would make spaces look beautiful and people loved them. But I was too scared to charge anything, even £150 for a party of 30. So what I would do is I would charge for the food and the alcohol, but I would just do all of the decor, make all these beautiful spaces, and then I would end up spending about £150 to £300 per event. And every time I kept saying to myself, that's okay, it's publicity. You know, I've got beautiful photographs, I've got things I can put on my profile, on my portfolio. And you know what? It wasn't making me any money because I hadn't done any market research. No one wanted to buy a beautiful bachelorette party or a hen do. What they wanted to do was to go down to the quayside, have some drinks, and maybe go to an 80s dance class. They didn't want what I was offering. And so I was creating something that was very niche for a market that didn't really exist. I'm not saying that wouldn't work for someone who is maybe out there and wants to do that. Take the idea, got no problem with it. But what I didn't do is I didn't do the market research. What that led me to do is I did a lot of charity work. I did a lot of work with charities to help raise their profile, run events, and do marketing. And that was fun because I felt like I was really helping. But what I didn't realize is when I was asking for payment, they could only pay me £10 an hour, which is fine because I thought, oh, well, at least I'm earning something. I forgot that as an entrepreneur, being self-employed, I actually really needed to think that through a little bit more. So what I hadn't thought about was things like, if you get paid £10 an hour, you don't get any sick pay anymore. You don't have holiday pay. You don't have times or contingency for being paid at that amount. So I might do somebody's website, an entire website for £500. And what that means is I wasn't only devaluing myself, but I was also devaluing my competitors, because what that meant is I was setting an unrealistic standard for other people. So because I hadn't done my market research, I was not only too cheap when I was presenting myself, I was also making an unrealistic expectation of that market, which is problematic in itself. So what I found is I was working with all of these charities who were receiving funding, but I myself was not receiving funding. And what that meant was that I was just getting into more and more of a scrape. I was taking out loans, I was spending on my credit card, but I wasn't charging properly. And so I would really say, if you're listening to this and you think that's me, forgive yourself, because you're exactly where you need to be right now. You know better because you're learning and you're taking the step to learn. And feel free to reach out if that is you, because honestly, it was so hard to actually realize, oh my gosh, I have a business, but I'm just running it into the ground. And actually, do you know what? I wasn't running a business. I was running a hobby. I was trying to be so nice to everybody else, but I just wasn't really doing well. So then I did market research the next time when I did a podcast course that I created in 2020. I did this as part of my MBA. So because I was in a classroom setting and we had to choose a dissertation, I chose to do the entrepreneurial business plan, which I loved. And I wrote this report, and I put so much time in it. And to be honest, rather than just working on it at the end, I'd worked on it the entire year. I was so excited about it. However, what I would say is, I did so much research for that. I looked at the, different, in fact, I'll write some of them down in case it helps anyone. But pastel, if you haven't heard of that before, some people put an E or an L the other way, but it's the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors in a business. So in the macro environment, so outside and external to your business. I did SWOTs, so your strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. I did that of myself and also of the my competitors. I also looked at the Boston Matrix. So I did a great deal of research looking at what is the market for podcasting, but not just podcasting, what is the market for online courses? What I found was there was absolutely a market for that. But what I did was I actually, I lined up 100 people to test my platform, to test my course. Now, I made a key mistake that I want to really reference here, because you might be going through this and think, that's me. So I created a course. It was too big. It was maybe 5 or 6 modules. What it should have been is smaller bite-sized pieces, because people who were learning were new to the subject. But what I did is I wanted to prove that I was an expert, or that I wanted to prove that I was good enough, or that people should trust me. So I made this course that was so complex. And what I did is I lost my confidence because it was so complex. Another thing that I did is I recruited over 100 beta testers, which is great. I mean, these are people who wanted to test out the project. They actually really wanted to learn how to podcast. They were pre-sold on it, you know, and the reason they wanted to do that was because they'd seen me having my own material and my own podcast. So I already had proven, you know, we talk about authority and positional authority. I had proven that I had experiential authority to do that. Now, what I did there is I gave them the course for free. So rather than pre-selling and saying, I'm going to do a podcasting course, it's going to be £100, or it's a starting course at £27, I gave it to them for free. So I charged nothing, which means that for those who were really dedicated, they were excited and they did the course and they loved it. For those who were a little bit not sure, they didn't pay anything, so they didn't need to put the time in, so they weren't invested. What I found is that I was really excited about it, but then I lost confidence because no one had bought it. So I couldn't get it up and running fast because I didn't have the oxygen, as Steve says, in my business to give me the space and the money to keep going. So what happened is I just tried harder and harder and harder, and I felt worse and worse. I had this beautiful course that looked beautiful. The branding was right, but a lot of the content lacked structure or needed a little bit of shaping. And so what I did is I kept hiring consultants. I kept hiring people who would make it better for me. But actually, I didn't need to do that because I already had all the answers. What I needed was the time and the attention and the focus on that one thing. One of the things to come back to Profit First, which is the book I was talking about, is Mike talks a lot about going from A to B. Sometimes the quickest route is actually to go from A to B. So if my route had been, Ash is going to create a podcasting course and the outcome is we have a course that people can buy, that would have been my A to B. But what I did is I went up to Z, Y, P, I went all over the show because I wanted to prove that my course was worthwhile. Now, what's crazy for me is I removed that course from being available because I felt like it wasn't good enough. And now people ask me every day, do you have a podcasting course? I know you're busy. I know I can't work with you, but can you please put something together, because I really want to learn and I trust you and I value you. And I'm thinking, what? And I'm also doing my neurolinguistic programming in hypnotherapy training at the moment so that I can better serve my clients. So that means that I can help people with their blocks more. And one of the things that I realized is I had a block myself. I thought that unless I have a media degree, I can't teach people how to podcast. But I have a podcast which is listened to by people all over the world. As I said, in Alaska, Japan, Uganda. And it has, people who are really interested in it. So why can't I teach them to podcast? That's a block in my brain. And so I really encourage you today, if you've got something that you're holding on to that isn't true, maybe it's time to reevaluate that. And again, let me know in the comments or reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. I would like to say what I'm doing now in terms of market research, just to close off. So I've got quite a few opportunities that I'm considering at the moment. It's really nice when people ask you if you can do this or if you want to do this piece of work. And I've got a really exciting thing that I want to do, which is in line with my values around supporting creatives. But it's going to take a lot of capital. Now, in the past, I've just jumped all in, or I've made decisions, or I've had a little bit of thinking. I've sometimes done market research, but when it comes to premises, I think it's a different story. I think people undermine how much, we can sometimes forget how much actually having an office space is so important. This is why I encourage anyone who's a tech entrepreneur to really love the bootstrap lifestyle and work from home and work remotely if you can. But if you have a premises, it has a huge risk to it. There's insurance, procedures, policies, there's the cost of the premises. And so what I would like to say is I'm going through that at the moment. I've got a brilliant opportunity to grow my space that's already beautiful. And I really want to help support amazing creatives and, you know, give them a space to work. And before I jump in on that, I need to make sure that I'm actually going to be able to put my oxygen mask on, pay my own rent, pay myself a wage, pay my team before I jump into doing something like that. So I would highly, you know, encourage you to think about where you are right now. Yes, sometimes taking risks are good. Sometimes taking on debt is a good thing. But sometimes, you know, just being frugal and looking at what you've got and the resources you've got is more important. And this is something I'm doing at the moment in my own business. I've decided to cut down on networking because I tend to do, maybe at some points in the past, I had networked 3 times a day. But that meant that I was meeting people, but I was never selling anything. I was never making any money because I was never following up with those leads because I had so many that I had no time to get back to them. And actually, I saw something from Claire, who may be watching this, but Claire Zolutana, I think you say her name. But she'd said something the other day. She'd met someone on networking, and then she felt annoyed on LinkedIn when they said, hey, why are you connecting with me? Or nice to meet you, but I don't know how we met. And she didn't understand that. And I thought, you know what? I do that a lot. I'll say to someone, oh my gosh, who are you again? How did we meet? And you know what? If you are doing so much networking and you're not actually really getting that valuable time with people, it is so easy to not know who everyone is. And I think it's important to network in the right places and spend your time and money effectively. So I'm going through that at the moment. I'm clawing back on projects. I'm saying no. And I think that's really empowering. So what I want to say in final, I've really enjoyed chatting today, as I can see by the time. But a final recap, you know, we've talked a little bit about who I am. So you know that now. If you come, I'm going to be around every Tuesday. Every second Tuesday, let's make sure you know that. Actually, the next session I'm doing, I'll be talking about podcasting. So I'm actually going to be talking a little bit more in the theory and things like that, but it's going to be the market value of, well, why you should podcast. What is its market segment in relation to marketing? What is its value? You know, how can it help you grow your business? So that's going to be hopefully helpful to just talk about some of the key concepts of podcasting. And then I just want to say about, excuse me a second. So about, we spoke a little bit about this book I'm reading, Profit First and People Over Profit, CSB, CSR, the importance of market research. And I think what I wanted to say just to close is, I said profit first for me was really triggering, and I prefer people over profit. But having looked at it, I think you can create more shared value and you can behave ethically rather than virtue signaling. Think about what you're doing in your business. But the main thing I wanted to say is, I don't think it's about profit first or people over profit. I think it's about profit with purpose. And that's what I want to leave you with today. Thank you so much.